Overwatch League 2019 Stage 1 will forever be remembered as a GOATS fest. Despite it being possible to counter the comp, most teams aren't crazy enough to do it, except for the one and only Chengdu Hunters, who refused to play into a meta that they weren't suited for, and instead one-tricked the execution of DPS comps, rarely using GOATS at all, until later in the stage when it was obvious they couldn't win without it, but we'll leave that off to the side, as well as the fact that they only won 3 games, but hey, a lot of teams in the playoffs won 4, so despite their tactics getting utterly wrecked in some of their series, they did famously take the Vancouver Titans, one of the best teams in the league, to a 5-map set, which not many teams can claim. And in fact, did beat the Atlanta Reign, who are a playoff team, and most would rank in A tier. So Chengdu shows us that they can punch above their weight, playing off meta. So in today's video, we're going to look at how their team composition operates, the plays they have to make to get it to work, and then also, sadly, why it fails more times than not, explaining why almost no one in the entire league wants to emulate this style, because it is so boom or bust. The first thing I want to cover are some basic rule sets of getting this to work up against the dreaded 3-3. Attack it early. You never want to get in a position where you haven't done meaningful damage to the enemy and they got onto point. The way this meta works right now, GOATS wins the objective, so if they get to the objective uninhibited, there's nothing in the game that can go contest the point realistically, except for maybe Wrecking Ball when he gets a big shield, which is one of the main reasons why you do play ball. But even more so than that, you play him so you can set up these non-standard engagements, pushing aggressively into the enemy team's side of the map, forcing them to burn cooldowns, and oftentimes take a deathmatch-esque fight out in open space, rather than waiting for them to get to the objective where they're strong. When you get that to work, it looks amazing. But let's look at a counter example to show you the other side of this, where Vancouver Titans plays the same comp, Moira version of GOATS, is designed to play this more defensive style, get onto the objective, and sustain, whereas Zen GOATS is the more aggro style, where you want to discord something and rush it down. You see here, even with Vancouver losing their diva early in the fight, it's still pretty darn hard for Chengdu to make any progress. Granted, now, they're going up against one of the best GOATS teams in the world, who's also insane at clutching out these moments, but there's a lot to be said with the pure math of how much more powerful the GOATS comp gets just by being on the objective and Zarya having charge. With Vancouver's swift target calling, anything coming to touch onto the point doesn't live to tell the tale. Then they get their insane ultimates, then they're holding the objective, and that's where this strategy looks to lose really hard. And sadly, the only adaptation Chengdu could have made is play the objective less, as in, to just keep poking from range, playing more careful to whittle down their defenses while giving up the objective, which ultimately is the entire point of playing the game anyway. You have to lose the objective to win the fight to a considerable degree to counter the sustained playstyle. And to that point, this is why on certain maps this strategy looks to be a lot better than others. If you've watched a lot of the Overwatch League, you've seen teams go on Numbani A, attacking with a Reinhardt GOATS comp, and almost never make it to point with a very fair fight. Chengdu's strategy looks really good on a map like Numbani, where they can send the ball to go contest the point, create crossfire angles to charge up ultimates, and take their time. As long as they play this right and don't make a mistake, they'll eventually get the cap. This is a stark difference to the way that control point works, where if this was a control point, well, Atlanta would have been winning this whole time because they're in control, right? They're allowed to play defensively, but since you're on the attack and the only thing you have to lose is your own time bank, which can also come to bite you. Spoiler alert, they will end up losing this map because of this, but you can wait to charge up for your ultimates and get the good positioning to set up these big ult combos that will eventually kill the entire GOATS comp. Ameng, although dies, puts an aggressive minefield down at the spot where the GOATS comp will have to contest. Elsa gets the EMP, and Jinmu goes for these extremely safe barrages, where he drops his payload of micro rockets outside of harm's way. He's very precise with where he positions when he presses Q to make sure he doesn't die, as he does so much damage, even just getting one kill is probably enough, and it's more important, in my opinion, from the Pharah's perspective here, that you just don't die and don't get greedy. Try to avoid as much damage as you can. Now, after winning the first fight on Rialto, you see how the Pharah ball combo has to play up against GOATS. They got to go aggro deep into the enemy side of the map, because once GOATS gets onto the objective, they're going to be draining some massive amounts of time bank off the clock. clock. So with this, they set up uncontested damage angles, going deep, and their team fights largely are won by Wrecking Ball mine placement. Look how Ameng sets up the mines and then boops Ryan into them. And then between that and the Pharah damage over the top, as long as they execute those explosions, they'll eventually get the objective. Only problem is, when you start to take the time bank into account, just playing the team comp with the mass sustain can drain time off the clock and set you up to eventually win with your comp. Because here's the thing. Both of these maps that I've just shown, where it looked like hunters were at a massive advantage up against the Rain on Numbani and Rialto, they end up losing both of these due to time bank inefficiency. Let me show you what I mean. As soon as Jinmu messes up a single barrage, they lose control of the map and then start to get spawn trapped up against the deadly 3-3 and a Defran hiding around a corner on the payload on high energy. The 3-3 comp here has all of the options. They can play defensive, just waiting on cart for a while, and then use their cooldowns to go for aggro pushes to go get kills without dying themselves because they have such outrageous sustain. And because Chengdu doesn't land the EMP self-destruct combo because most of Atlanta hides around a corner or goes too deep to get hit by it, Chengdu simply cannot go toe-to-toe on this corner. Even as they start to do damage, the Goats comp regens, peels back, gives a little bit of cart, then comes back with full health and all their cooldowns yet again. Jinmu just pops the barrage to try to make a miracle happen, but he ends up having to swap over to Brigida in order to get some presence on the cart because it's the only space they really have to work with. And that time bank differential right there with the amount of stall they got really ended up mattering as they go into the overtime round, down almost a minute. And that's where we've seen these DPS comps really struggle. And I think I've seen a lot of teams try to pull out the Pharah here with like a minute left, and it seems to always fail. Because now, as opposed to the 2 minutes or so you were able to take on your first attack, well, you somehow have to rush the fight when that's not really what your comp does. Atlanta's Goats is allowed to peel back, take their time, give up a little of objective progress until they find a good fight, go and get a pick, and then it's all over. The Squishy comp performs far worse with a man disadvantage than the 3-3 does, so the fight's basically over after that. Even more unfortunate, despite rolling up Rialto, as we've shown earlier, once you get to the part of the map where Goats is heavily favored with the payload going right down the lane of an incredibly tight choke, it's hard for these characters that need to be fighting at longer ranges to go toe-to-toe with the brawl. Jinmu goes on a big flank, Aomeng tries to roll in with the mines, but the EMP isn't quite good enough. Pokpo's Reinhardt is able to scurry away, and when the hat comes off cooldown, shatters the cart. And when you're going up against things like Grav, Shatter, Brig Stun with a big shield, those claustrophobic engagements are basically impossible to win, which is weird because essentially their comp just couldn't win in that third stage of the map. They had to swap to Goats. And even more so when they go onto the defense here, I think they make a bit of a mistake trying to fight the cart in a similar type of close range environment. Snipers can't get angles, their tank drops to contest and dies, and now the cart's just rolling. They have a massive time bank advantage. What are you gonna do? Well, they gotta go back to Goats as well, right? The beauty of this comp is that when the enemy don't make the right shot call against it, it starts to look really good. But the downside is, I'm not so convinced that all that much changes even with the big patches that are coming through, and most of these principles still remain the same. The most impressive performance thus far, I think, has to be the very close loss to the Vancouver Titans. But honestly, most of that success came down to Bumper playing way too cocky, which he oftentimes tries to get away with whenever he can. And considering they ended up clutching the series in the end, he did get away with it. For example, let me show you a couple mistakes that he made up against the damage comp here, where as Winston, he's consistently trying to go aggressive. Here on their attack, instead of trying to control and maintain the cart and survive, they're sending dives up with man disadvantage to get focus fired and killed, committing way too hard to these deep engages, and really just disrespecting Chengdu's ability to hit some shots. Often setting up to bait Bumper in to go too deep to get a crossfire onto him like they do here on their attack, thinking he's just gonna be invincible with a Zarya bubble on him, but no. See, the thing is, Chengdu was going to struggle to get onto the point and kill anything there. Bumper didn't even have to go get a kill. He just had to survive and use the time drain tactics that we've talked about. Now, it isn't all doom and gloom for you Chengdu DPS fans out there, because although I don't think Goats got nerfed much, Bunker overall is stronger, which already was good up against Goats, but was weak to dive previously, but is stronger now up against dive, if that makes sense. Here, the triple DPS of Chengdu just lands too many shots before the rain can actually close the distance appropriately. And realistically, getting Dive to work against this requires a lot of practice, which is something that no team in the Overwatch League has really been doing for the past few months. Oddly enough, I actually think Rain had a better shot of just running goats to point against this, because Pharah has her best angles out in the open, but once you get onto point, it's a little bit harder. Dive wants to play out in the open as well, but that's where the turret gets a lot of value. Overall, the pivots and rotations coming from the bunker defense here proves to be too good, and something to think about moving into the live patch now, where characters like Ashe, Junkrat, and Orisa are all better, and the biggest one of all, in my opinion, would be the DPS's boop abilities that keeps Dive characters off of them, Coach Gun and Concussion Mine. And Torb got a health buff against the Dive characters too, so that triple DPS comp may be a bit robust up against Dive, and it's pretty good up against Goats too, so luckily enough to see some variation in the meta, I do think we are going to see Bunker get used on any map where you can set up. Horizon's a great one. Some teams have tried Hollywood. It's a little bit more difficult because all of the angles are much tighter and the distance that the tanks have to clear on the attack is much shorter. And it's fights like these that make me think that we're still going to see Goats used up against this, even if you might consider Ashe and Junkrat counter Goats characters, because the 3-3's ultimates eventually overwhelms this. It used to be you would consider Genji Blade and Primal Rage to be the win buttons that you finally press to stop the bunker from beating you, but the CC from Ashe and Junkrat is so good, those might not be as guaranteed as they used to be, and you might just need the 3-3 power of things like Sound Barrier and Rally to overwhelm them at close range. I hope this video was helpful, giving us some insight into the fun playstyle, definitely to watch from the Chengdu Hunters, but also the reality of why it doesn't get used more often and how difficult it is to get this to work. And even when it does work, it kind of doesn't because it takes too long to win the objective, which is the entire point of the game. Guys, if you enjoyed the video and you found it useful, please be sure to leave it a like. It really does help us out, lets us know that you're enjoying the content. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and be sure to hit the bell icon so that you get notified when our videos go live. Link in the description is our Twitter, where we tweet out news updates and dank memes. That's been it for me. I've been FREEDO for Your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.